Welcome to the Master Your Millions podcast, the show all about your financial potential and leaving a legacy for future generations. Here are your hosts, Jason and Scott Henderson.
We have a special guest that Jason met at Prosperity Camp. Jason, who do we have coming on?
Well, thanks, Scott, and welcome everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I'm going to have to pronounce a little bit. It's Aaron Vilaubi, I believe is how you pronounce your last name. Anyway, right now, believe it or not, he is one of the fastest rising motivational speakers in the personal development space. And he's currently the youngest motivational speaker on the globally recognized Absolute Motivation YouTube channel. There's more than 1.6 million followers. So there have been hundreds of thousands of people that have heard his voice on that channel. Drawing from his experience as an endurance athlete, former corporate consultant, peak performance candidate with the Flow Research Collective, and a career success advisor, Aaron coaches individuals on becoming a mentally fortified peak performer by leveraging their strengths, motivational interviewing strategies, and fitness, running, and nutrition as a vehicle for bringing positive change in people's lives. Welcome to the podcast, Aaron.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. J. Scott, pleasure to meet you both.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Tell us a little bit about, Aaron, that you grew up in basically almost downtown LA, right? I mean, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, born and raised in Los Angeles, California. I know that y'all from Utah. It's a little bit different in terms of weather and in culture, but born and raised in a city called Downey. It's about 9 miles on the southeast side from the heart of LA City, so not too far away, miles-wise, but LA traffic will say it's all about time. It could take an hour or 10 minutes. But born and raised in that part, a few miles north of Long Beach, a couple miles to the west or east of Compton, and primarily Hispanic Latino community. And growing up, that was always what I was familiar with. I'm Spaniard Mexican by heritage. You mentioned my last name, Vilaubi. There's not many of us out there that were primarily from Spain. But growing up, it was always the same culture that I was surrounded by. It was very Mexican, Hispanic, Latino influencing culture. And with that, it was a very much of, you got to work hard. You got to put in the sweat equity. And that was always the lens through which I viewed hard work. If I sweat more, I was paid more. If I put in the physical labor, if I was tired at the end of the day, that meant I did a good job. But as I grew up and got opportunities that my parents didn't have, such as being a first-generation college student, getting my first, quote-unquote, white-collar job, I got the degree. How do I use my degree? These were things that I couldn't go to mom and dad and ask for. I had to look around to my peers, to people who had walked the path before me, people from different states, different backgrounds, industries, and say, how do I do this? And really having to swallow my pride and say, look, I have to be the student long after I've graduated from university. I need to continue to learn. One thing that my mom would always tell me is, Aaron, use what you know to figure out what you don't know. She's teaching me resourcefulness from when I'm 5, 8, 10 years old. But then that lesson went from use what you know to figure out what you don't know to use what you have to obtain what you don't have. So right now it's about, you have to be scrappy, resourcefulness. How can you apply and be of value in spaces that you've never been? But once I got that first job out of college, it was like, man, it's just totally new. I got to figure out how hard work feels when it's not sweat equity. I never equated hard work to sending emails or making phone calls or writing papers. That was never hard work, right? Because I wasn't sweating. I wasn't physically tired. I'm mentally tired for sure. You're beat and emotionally exhausted from getting no's from a sales call to any other form of it. But that was something I had to learn. And fortunately, through using what I knew to figure out what I didn't know, using what I had to figure out what I didn't have, I've been able to achieve a level of success that's continuing to grow and meet exceptional individuals like yourself.
So you have a 9-to-5 job. Yeah, you don't do that now. What caused that shift? Did you not get along with your boss? Didn't like the grind? What was it? Didn't play well with other children? I mean, that's how I was. I don't play well with other children. And so I needed to be on my own.
No, totally understand. Fair questions. Well, I don't think my boss is going to be listening, or if he does, I'm just kidding. It has nothing to do with not getting along with the boss. I guess I'll start with the first job, just kind of give a quick little origin story. First job out of college, I worked for a marketing agency, and great time, really a great time. And how I fell into that job was pretty serendipitous. reached out to an alumni from a university who worked for Vans in their marketing, or sorry, he worked for Adidas in their marketing department. I was a student athlete in college. I figured I'm studying marketing. I have an athletic background, play college sports. This is a great integration of the two worlds. It didn't work out there. I wasn't necessarily going to say, hire me. I was saying, how did you get to where you are so I can follow in your footsteps and have that same level of success? Great conversation. After we hang up, he says, check your email. He copies me on an email with a guy he worked with at Vans corporate out here in Costa Mesa, California, and says, hey, we worked together at Vans for 10 years. He now runs his own marketing agency. His name is Brandon Ball. You should ask him the same questions you asked me. That led to an in-person meeting. I thought it was going to be 30 minutes. We were there for 4.5 hours. He schools me on marketing, even though I'm a senior about to graduate. I'm here feeling like, man, I don't know a thing about marketing now. This guy just ran me through the gauntlet. He ends up walking me to my car after 4 hours of like a really cool visit, seeing their projects. He says, would you want to work here? Yeah, that'd be great. So I ended up working at that company for about 6 months. Loved it. And the story of like sleeping on New York City sidewalks, that was, more accurate, I should say New York City sidewalk, because it was a one-time thing, but that was a 22-hour shift, doing a pop-up event with the New York City Football Club and Adidas. Really a fun time. But I left that job because I got recruited to work at Chapman University, which was the school that I attended. And I didn't want to leave. And my boss who hired me, she had to kind of wear me down in order to get a yes out of me. And she said, hey, look, one of the perks is if you are a full-time staff member at the university, they'll pay for your master's degree. I said, well, man, if I'm a first generation college student, I was very much let me get my bachelor's and I'm done. I want to work. I want to make money. It's time to go hustle. And I thought, well, man, if I can get a master's degree, that's kind of just my way of what kind of a thank you would that look like to my parents who sacrificed what they had to make sure I could have a chance at education. So ultimately, I begrudgingly, but very gratefully said yes and said goodbye to my friends and all the wonderful people at Starch Creative. Shout out to them. Wonderful agency. But worked at the university for almost 5 years, and I was in career services there. My job was to build partnerships with company recruiters to get them to recruit talent. Loved my boss. I was very, very fortunate to have the relationship I had with her. She was one of those people who was an exceptional leader, just a wonderful leader, and taught me so much about leadership from an academic standpoint, which ultimately I got my master's in leadership development. She went through the same program and was a mentor through that angle, but also was one of those perfect examples of praising in public and coaching in private. She believed in my potential long before I did. There's something called the Rosenthal theory, and it's this belief that if you teach a person, or if you look at a person as they are, they only become worse. But if you look at a person as what they could be, they become what they should be. She did that every single day for me. She always believed that I could be a leader, that I had potential that was unfulfilled, and gave me every opportunity to grow into that. So I had a great relationship with her, but left that job because higher ed was great. I loved what I did. I got to work with college kids, and the age gap wasn't big. I was very close to it. But the growth for a career in higher ed is pretty low. It's unfortunate in that reality, but I wanted more pay, full transparency, and in order for me to do that, I had to break out of the industry. I had a chance to go into consulting, working for a consulting firm. And truth be told, I took that job, full transparency, I took that job for the money. It was one of those things where it's like, it's going to be a great pay bump. It's going to look good on the resume. I have consultant. I'm going to look really cool. And I'm young. Like, it's going to be great. And I knew that I was going to be going into corporate. And the only thing I knew up to that point was just the textbook corporate definition and visual of corporate America. You're sitting in a gray cubicle with recycled air, and you only see the sun twice a day when you walk in the office and when you leave, and maybe at lunch. That was all I knew. And after about a year, actually less than a year of that, I realized that I was doing something, and even though I was making great money, I was doing something that was spiritually criminal. It was breaking me down every day because I didn't want to do what my bosses did as far as promotion. I didn't want to live the life that they lived. I didn't want to work the hours that they worked. And I wasn't willing, and I knew this long before I left, I knew that I wasn't willing to commit myself in the way that I would need to grow in the company. But I stayed because the pay was great. But every day it ate at me until it finally came to the point where it was where my mental health was suffering. And right around that time, this was February of this year, I got in touch with James. I've been following Absolute Motivation for about 2 years. Finally found out who the keynote speaker was. Been a huge fan of personal development for a long time. But when all that transition was happening, I liked who I worked with, loved who I worked with. My bosses, my colleagues, they were great. But the work itself and where I was working was just killing me. And it was one of those things where if you don't say no to what you know you should be, eventually your body will tell you to say no. And that's exactly what happened. I had mental health was struggling, physical health was struggling, and when the time came for me to transition out, I was put on a performance plan. My performance at work was suffering, and the timing of prosperity camp with my relationship with James developing, with me not passing my performance plan, even though I was crushing it, the last 2 weeks I lost momentum. Can't explain it other than divine intervention. It was me trying to do it my way, and then God said, no, I got to do it my way. And that led to me going to prosperity camp 2 days after I was fired / realized this job is killing me. Why am I fighting to keep the job that's killing me? And then ultimately ending up in Absolute Motivation that following Friday. In a span of a week, I went from getting fired to being a part of one of the most globally recognized motivational teams in the world.
I love that. So you have mentioned a couple of different instances where you've had some mentors, because you said use what you don't know to figure out what you use what you do. Your mom said to use what you do know to figure out what you don't know. And some of that was to rely on people, right? So you reached out to this guy who was an alum of your college, and that turned into the other lady who basically became a mentor, and then another mentor back from the college. Who else would you say have been key individuals in your journey?
Yeah, great question. Well, I mean, the first person that comes to mind, especially now, is Mr. James Dixon, as you know, CEO of Absolute Motivation. He and I got in touch, as I mentioned earlier, February of this year. And
how did that
started
happen?
off,
you reached out to him, Instagram, or what happened?
Yeah, on Instagram. And
you just messaged him.
Just sent him a message. And this was before he had the hundreds of thousands of followers that he had, which was kind of special for me. I even have a screenshot of his profile, like when I first reached out to him. And I've been following personal development for a long time. The Tony Robbins, the Eric Thomases, the Walter Bonds, all the motivational speakers. Love listening to them. Had come across James's voice, but didn't know who this person was. And I was like, I got to figure out who this. I've been listening for 2 years. I don't know who this guy is. Let me do some digging. So I found out who he was. I was like, I think this is the guy on Instagram. Sent him a message and just said, thank you. I was like, hey, thank you for your words. They've picked me up out of some dark times and dark places. And you don't know me and I don't know you personally, but I feel like I do because I treat it as if you're my mentor speaking to me directly. And he ended up responding with my own personal voice message, which for me, I was like, this guy's got the voice of a mountain. That's amazing. He said my name, that kind of a thing. And we kept in touch for 6 months, but I didn't know that he was following my content that entire time leading up to Prosperity Camp, which is ultimately what led him to say, I'm going to invite you to this event. This is what it looks like. I said, wow, this is very special.
Following your content, what was your content? Did you have stuff that you're putting out there on social media, or what's going on? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So
this was obviously while you had a job, right?
Yes.
So at the same time, you're parallel being an entrepreneur, sort of putting some, and what is that content?
Motivational, inspirational content. Back in 2017, I decided I'm going to learn how to make money on social media, on specifically Instagram. I had a pretty decent following. I feel like I knew how to do the social media thing. And I figured I should learn how to monetize this. That was all the talk. So I started following the entrepreneur accounts, the guys posing in front of Lamborghinis and the penthouses and the money and the whatever, not knowing that any of it could be fake or not. I just took it for face value. Got in contact with some guys and learned how to sell Instagram growth, which was really just a follow, unfollow bot process. And I'm very transparent about this because this is a chapter of my life called social media and side hustles and snake oil. Not realizing I was selling snake oil, but they just told me, no, we know what's best. Like, this is just how things are done. Okay, well, I'm new to this, so I guess this is how it goes. But then after a while, I realized this was not what I should be doing, especially with the people who I was doing it with. When they tell me, hey, we're going to go shoot some content, we're going to go to this photo studio, and it's the inside prop of a private jet with fake money on the table and a motion picture window, so it looks like you're flying over Paris or Fiji or anything, daytime, nighttime, and you post it on Instagram. so people can say, buy my course, or look at my lifestyle. Don't you want to invest in what I'm doing? Like, give me your money and I'll make it happen. And I was like, this is not what I should be doing. This is wrong. But that was when I was putting out content of the nomad lifestyle, the rich nomad, make money from your phone type of thing. And once that left a bad taste in my mouth, I thought, okay, well, I've learned some social media skills in the past 2 years. This went on for 2 years. What do I really want to talk about? The first thing that came out was motivation and inspiration. I wanted to make people feel like they could do something amazing. I wanted people to feel inspired to take the action that they had to. And if it was just one word that I could say, one message I could put out into the world, if that made the difference in someone's day, didn't have to be their life, but it made them do one positive thing in the day, then I had to keep showing up and putting out that content. And I did that from 2019 all the way up until till this day. But it was mostly radio silence for 4.5 years. 4.5 years, and then James reached out, or I got in contact with James, and then I realized he was starting to follow my content. But over that course of time, it was just what would be good for the world. I've seen all the worst and the most diabolical sides of social media. How can I combat that? How can I use this tool for good? And it was, let me put out a good message. Let me speak what's on my heart. Let me share some educational information. And to this day, that plan has served me pretty well. But it was radio silence for 4.5 years.
That's awesome. I know recently you were a part of an Absolute Motivation that someone had posted that they were actually considering ending their life, and having listened to that video, they decided not to do that. Yeah. Tell us how that makes you feel. I mean, there's not real monetary compensation for that, but I mean, just say a few words how you felt about that when you read it.
I mean, for me personally, I can relate to that on a very personal level. I mentioned earlier that my mental health had taken a dip. I've never been one to fall into that type of thought process or go down that rabbit hole of why am I living anymore? You could ask anybody. Look at my baby pictures. I was always a happy kid. I was playing in mud. I'm running around. I'm doing that thing. But I'd hit such a low because I had gotten injured. I've been an athlete my entire life, baseball, sports, long distance running to this day. I herniated a disc back in March, and that took away my ability to run and lift weights. So as far as my identity that I had cultivated as an athlete, I was no longer an athlete. And that was kind of in hindsight, having gone through my experience, I realized that was my fallback for when I failed in other areas of life. Well, at least I can still be a physical guy. At least I can still pick something up and put it back down. That gave me a sense of value. With academics, I could do well academically. With hard work, as long as I dedicated myself and applied myself, I would be successful in the end. But when I got put on a performance plan, they're telling me, Aaron, you're working hard, but you're just not doing well. It's like, wait a minute, this hard work thing always worked out. What do you mean it's not working out? So not only was my hard work and my plan that I'd always fallen back on not working, my athletics was also not working. My physicality was gone. And so for me, I hit this point of like, where's my value? Am I valuable anymore? And I'd hit this crazy low where for 4.5 straight months, I wanted to fall asleep and not wake up. And I don't know if I had really hit the point where I wanted to do something about it. I didn't want to hurt myself in that way, but I was very much okay with falling asleep and not waking up. And so when I see somebody post something like, I'm ready to end it, I'm going through mental health issues, I feel alone, no one understands me, it's taken on a very different tone from before having gone through the experience that I went through. There's a Bible verse my sister had sent me. It's to this day my favorite verse. It's 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24. And it's Paul talking about how he became all things to all people so that he could save some for the sake of saving a few. I became like one above the law so I could save those above the law. I became like a Jew so I could save Jews. That was the whole premise of it. And it's funny because it ends with a little bit of an athletic sport analogy in there too. But when I read that verse, and she sent this to me 3 months prior to me going through my mental health issues, I'm like, man, maybe I had to go through that so that I could relate to people going through that level of pain and that level of darkness. And even that story led to a piece of my motivational story of when you're going through a valley of darkness, you don't find the light at the end of the tunnel because you're not in a tunnel. You don't find the light at the end of the tunnel, you become the light. And that is what really propelled me into saying, maybe this is something that I could do to speak. Maybe there's a more powerful message to be delivered. God had to take me through that low. And when I see people going through lows like that or leaving comments like that, the message that I would want to share to them is I know what it feels like when you feel when hope is gone, when you feel devoid of hope, when you do not feel like anything can get better. I've been there. It is the scariest feeling in the world to have such little hope. What I can tell you is just go through the motions if that's all you have left. Because I had hit that point where all I could do was go through the motions. And over time, you find that when you want to fall asleep and not wake up, but you still wake up, you find a very raw, indifferent part of yourself that's able to look at the world through a different lens. I discovered the lesson of being the light, not finding the light, because I just happened to still wake up when I didn't want to. So for anyone going through a tough time, if all you have is going through the motions, go through the motions because your lesson's coming.
So what's the purpose now then? Has your purpose molded since you started in February to now?
Molded in the sense that it's become more refined. So a message that I've spoken to college students is that when you love something, that's your passion. You're very passionate about it. You wake up on fire and you want to do something with it. But passion is for yourself. Passion applied to the world is purpose. My passion is speaking. I love to speak. I love this. I would do this if I wasn't paid for it. But I obviously want to make a living and I'd like to pay for rent and make sure I have something to eat at night. So yes, of course I get paid for it. But I would do this if I wasn't paid for it. But speaking for myself was me wanting to feel good about being on stage or feeling a sense of importance, feeling that identity, that sense of importance with the identity of sport or identity of importance with doing well academically or working hard. That was for me. But when I speak to a crowd of people, a high school, when most of these kids have parents who immigrated from Mexico and they're in the same shoes that I was in, where you're trying to figure out how to school or how to college, how to equate working hard, working at a desk versus working in a field, I can relate to that. And if I can speak a message that makes them feel like they have value in the world, where yes, you are competitive as a employee, even though you don't have the background that maybe some people you're competing against have. If I can speak value to them, that to me is purpose. I'm doing something with the gift I've been given. Gifts aren't for us, right? We have to, like, gifts are meant to be given. They're meant to be shared. James Dixon even says it so perfectly. He says, God, you're going to stand before God at the end of your life. He's going to say, what did you do with the gift I gave you? And if all you have to say is I did this, and this, but it's all about you getting better and nobody else got better as a result of your gift, then you haven't used your gift correctly. I want to apply this as much as possible to every audience that I can possibly reach, whether it's sports teams, first generation college students, or Americans to corporate America. Any audience that I can impact in a positive way for me is worth the endeavor.
And then looking back, I mean, you haven't had a long career. You and you're a little bit younger than I am.
Mm-hmm.
Would you change any of it? Would you change how you would have approached it? Would you change your mindset on things, or would you go through it exactly the same way?
It's a great question. Where my mind goes with that is, on one hand, it's everything I've gone through has led up to the person I am today. Why would I want to change that, right? Everything happens for a reason. Things happen for you, not to you. On the other hand, it's like, well, if I had done this differently, could that have produced a faster outcome? Could I have learned the lesson maybe not as much the hard way? Did I have to be stubborn as long as I was? I don't think I would have changed anything per se, because in hindsight, even in those moments where I was more stubborn and maybe slower to change, slower to adopt a lesson that my parents or mentors had tried to teach me, they stick more firmly now, I suppose. And so when I speak them to the next people that I'm trying to impact, or speak them from a stage, I can speak them with more conviction. The message comes through more authentically, and that's all I've ever wanted to be, is more authentic. So I would say I wouldn't change anything. You know, they're all lessons. That's all wisdom that can be passed on to the next generation and make a message that much more powerful. So I would say no. I would say no, but would definitely have taken notes on what to recognize in the future and say, don't be so slow to change.
Okay. So let's try this a little bit different. There's one of my best friends always asks me this question. If you were to divvy up your life from what we've talked about in this particular podcast, divvy it up to 3 or 4 pieces and give me one word that God was trying to teach you.
The 3 or
Trying
4
to teach you
pieces.
as far as like entrepreneurship goes, like to make you who
Mhm.
you are today. Can you do that? Can you go through and share some of those words? Like, what was it that he was really boil it down for us?
For the one word, it would be identity. The one word would be identity. You mentioned like 3 to 4 words to
Usually
sum up.
it's like phases. That's fine. Identity's
Okay.
great. So
Okay. Yeah. If I could do
no-
it one word through everything that's happened, it would be identity.
so for all of you listening, there was, Aaron shared a lot. He's in
Yeah.
the process of making his own millions and leaving a legacy himself. And it's been really cool to see someone as young as him reflect and be able to turn around and share that with the world, and not just share it in a way that really shared in a way that not only affects people but is relatable and touches people down the core. And I would invite all of you to think of that. Don't focus so much on the bumps in the road. Focus on the road as a whole. It makes life tend to be a bit easier. Jason, you had something you were going to share or say.
No, I keep muting myself. There's some construction outside. Aaron, and I don't know whether this is a touchy subject or not. I heard you speak in Georgia, and you did really, really good. But there was a portion of your speech where you talked about because you just said identity, right?
Yeah.
And one of those things, part of that speech is you talked about being referred to as coconut.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, how that fits in with identity, right?
Yeah.
You are not a victim. I don't see that you have ever had a victim mentality, and I certainly believe that you have a victor mentality. Now, the whole coconut thing, I though tested you.
Definitely. And it tested me because this isn't just exclusive to the Latino community, coconut referring to being brown on the outside and white on the inside. And you could look at any other demographic for Asian. I believe I have some Asian friends of mine, they'll be called banana, right? Yellow on the outside, white on the inside, or Oreo, black on the outside, white on the inside. And it's this idea that you're not ethnic enough, or you don't fit the bill of what is typical in your culture. And at first it's meant to be just kind of a joke, and even now I'll still get called it, but it doesn't nearly affect me as it used to. Because when I got called it the first time, I was 11 years old. And this is when I'm at a bigger school than I had been before. You go from elementary to middle school. And the standard that my parents held for me was you need to get good grades. If you're going to do a sport, play at your best. Be the team captain. If you're not the captain, be one of the best players on the team. Be a leader in some regard. Get involved. Don't be a problem for your teachers. But somehow that was enough to give the students and the friends and the peers around me to call me, oh, you're a coconut. You're brown on the outside, you're white on the inside. And my Spanish wasn't perfect. I could understand it, but it wasn't perfect. That's also kind of a thing too that they'll joke on, is like, if you can't speak Spanish right, they call that being a no sabo kid. But for another time. But they hit me with this, and I wanted to have that social acceptance. You want to have that integration with people who look like you, who can relate to the culture. But they would call me coconut, and for me, that was like being outcast. That was me being ostracized for wanting to do well. But in the back of my mind, I was just trying to do what my parents encouraged me to do, what they expected of me to do, was to perform at my highest level. But somehow that made me not Mexican. That made me not Latino to do well. And I thought, when did this become the story that we told about the Latino community? Where if we did well in school, if we weren't a problem for our parents, if we did well in sports or got involved with the arts, somehow that made us less Latino. And I thought, to heck with that. Watch what this coconut does. So and I'm 11 years old, right? I'm not trying to say that this was like my peak, right? Like, I'm not trying to ride on the coattails of what I did when I was 11, 12, and 13. But I went out for student council, became president, became team MVP of all the sports that I played on. I took up alto saxophone. I became first chair alto saxophone in the city of Downey. Like these were things that I did. I got scholarships, but that was because I was so committed to saying, this is what you've called me. You've tried to, like I said in my speech, like they threw coconuts at me. They tried to knock me out. But what they didn't know is that coconuts take more people out every year than sharks. More people die every year from coconuts hitting them on the head than sharks do. I'm more deadly than a shark. They kept trying to use it to break me down, but I used it as a badge of honor. It became my weapon. And so I said, okay, you want to call me coconut? Watch what this coconut does. And the entire time, I still represented my Latino culture, my heritage. So that maybe the next generation of kids who say, well, I want to do well, but I don't want to do so well that I get made fun of. That's a real thing. And all of a sudden, not being good, it becomes the cool thing. Like, when did not wanting to try hard become cool? That's what I'm actively trying to get rid of at 11, 12, and 13 years old into this day. And if I can share that message with some kids who are in high school, that's what I want to do, because I know that will change their life. I mentioned, like, summing up what God was trying to tell me in one word: identity. Identity being, people will try to change your identity. They will try to tell you that you are something or that you're not. Or for me, I tried to limit God to, I'm an athlete. My identity is athlete. I've done everything from what I ate to how I slept to how I trained to be a better athlete, or just being a good academician. I limited God to 1 or 2 or 3 identities. But God created the universe. God can do, there's nothing, you can do all things through Christ, right? I did all of this. He created me in his image, and yet I say all I am is an athlete. And then that gets taken away from me with an injury. All I am is a hard worker. I do well in my job. Job gets taken away from me. I get fired. Academically, I'm going to do great. College, I even got a taste of that. Didn't know it at the time, but that tests me too. And so I tried to limit God to these 2 or 3 different identities, but once they all got taken away from me, it's like, who's left? What else is left? And I realized I'm a servant is what I am. I'm a servant is what I am. So I'm going to serve through my example. I'll serve through my words. None of it is mine. It's all the gift that's been given to me. I'm privileged to have the gift to be able to speak. I'm privileged to have the gift to have some level of athletic competence. But if I can use that as a vehicle, they're all just tools. They're all tools, not who I am. I use them to do good in the world, and not getting so wrapped up in I am this or I am that, but using them as tools and seeing it through that lens, I find is a much happier life. I do not feel limited. I don't feel like I'm boxing myself in, and I feel like I'm doing right in the Lord's name.
Love that. Love that. Well, we're coming to the end of time. And so kind of in final comments, final parting, like, what is the next mountain to climb? 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what is that goal for you?
Yeah, 5 years time.
I'm not sure I understand.
I don't either, Siri.
Siri's not sure. 5 years time, want to be a best-selling author, working on a book right now. Fortunate to have the people around me that I do to help make that possible. I want to be a #1 motivational speaker on Absolute Motivation, on various other platforms. Physically, I would like to accomplish an Ironman. There's something about endurance sports that brings me closer to the rawest version of myself, when it strips away all of the like anyone can say I can do a marathon from the comfort of their couch, right? When there's nice AC and it's warm. Anyone can say that, but when you get stripped raw from just running far, like for me it is, or Ironman distances, I love to see who I am in those moments. So from a physical goal, completing like a full Ironman is something I want to do. Financially, like buy a home. I do several properties. I want to make sure I'm impressing Dr. J right now. I'm going to buy several homes right now. And something that's personal, like very, very close to my heart too, is I'm very passionate about like food being medicine. You know, like Western medicine, Eastern medicine. I believe that food is medicine, and I know that in lower income areas, just statistically speaking, the data will show that lower income areas tend to be food deserts. And we talk about wanting to break generational curses. Lower income areas have a harder time doing that, but if you're not putting the right stuff in your body, how can you expect to have a good mindset or a good mood or feel motivated? You can give all the motivational words in the world, but if you're blocked from wanting to receive any of that message, you know, it's the proverbial lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink. So if I can change the water that these kids are drinking, maybe that will inspire them to want to seek more of it out. So ending food deserts or doing something to change that in my community is something I'm very passionate about as well. And bringing back arts programs. I was accidentally put into concert band. I was accidentally a band geek. I played alto saxophone, and I listened to smooth jazz on the radio with my pops because I didn't have a choice because it was his radio. But over time, I came to like the saxophone. And when I got put in concert band, my mom was like, hey, we can change you out of it. I told her, let me stay here. Let me see what this thing is about. I ended up becoming #1 first chair saxophone in Downey, California when I was 13 years old. Made all the difference in the world because that led to doing 1 year of it in high school. And that was my qualification to get into a 4-year private university. Didn't know that was going to happen, but imagine if I wasn't put into concert band. I would have never done any of the arts. Maybe I wouldn't have gone to the school that I went to. Maybe I wouldn't have met the people I did. Having conversations that I can now have because I had that background. If I can bring those arts programs back to elementary schools and middle schools, I know the impact it made for me, and I would love to make sure that kids have that same opportunity. Albert Einstein once famously said, genius is not, if you make a fish believe that genius is climbing a tree, it will live its whole life thinking it's dumb. Maybe some of these kids don't have the right tree. Maybe their tree is music, and they don't have that music yet. So if I can bring that to these kids in the next 5-10 years, maybe I can make some real change in my community.
Love that. Thank you. Jason, any final words?
We want to be there when you feel like you've got some of that direction. We want to celebrate with you. We invite you back, Aaron, to be a guest again and share some of your success. We would really love to hear that. Ever since I first met you, you're just a good guy attempting to do what's right. And, like you said, you're first generation college students in your family, and you're really blazing the trail. And I commend you. That's one of the reasons we wanted you to be on this podcast. I hope that you'd share, and other people that are the listeners out there, be motivated by what you're hearing. Go look him up. We're going to put his contact information in the show notes, everyone. Would really appreciate a subscribe and a review of our podcast. And like I said, if they need to reach you, I think it's Aaron Vilaubi on Instagram, right?
Yeah, Aaron Vilaubi, or if you just type in the last name Vilaubi, there's not many of us there. You'll find me in probably every one of my relatives.
Yeah, there's not many. So Vilaubi for those of us only listening. Go ahead, Scott.
And we will put it in the show notes down below. So again, Aaron, thanks for coming on.
Thank you both so much for having me.
Guys, if you would like to connect with Jason or I, make sure to hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or your favorite social media platform. Also, as Jason said, drop us a 5-star review. It really helps us out. Last, remember, mastering your millions all starts with your mind and your team. Make sure they are the best.
Thanks for listening to Master Your Millions with Jason and Scott Henderson. Check the show notes for any links or contact information about today's guest. Make sure to follow the show so you don't miss any future episodes.